I'm Leon Todd for G66. Welcome to another Tuesday Tone Tip. In today's video, I want to talk about the cabinet block in the FM3, and I want to share some of my essential tips and tricks with you all. Before we get started though, I've got my Les Paul plugged straight into input 1 on the FM3. The DI output is being recorded straight into Pro Tools with no post-processing, and I've got FM3 Edit open with the Atomica High amp block. Pretty much stock settings. All I've done is turn the depth control down to 0. And then I've got my favorite factory cab over here, this 4x12 Recto by York Audio. It is shot with a Shure SM57 microphone. So I'm going to use the term cabinet and impulse or IR interchangeably here. Essentially, all of the cabinets in the AXFX3 and FM3 cabinet block are impulse responses of guitar cabinets. Think of them like a snapshot of a mic'd up cabinet, and you'll know what we're dealing with here. So the SM57 is basically the industry standard for guitar tones. So I've started with a cabinet that I like, a big 4x12 with vintage 30s, that SM57 microphone, and we get this. Alrighty, that sounds like rock and roll. The first thing that I do though on just about any cabinet impulse that I load up here is I go to the preamp tab, and we're going to carve out the low end that we don't need, because these are close mic shots of a cabinet. You're going to have a proximity effect, and it's going to blow out the low end, and that low end is going to clash with the kick drum and the bass guitar, so we simply don't need it. A really good starting point is to set that to 80 Hertz. Here's the difference. So it clears out all that muck in the low end. And I know that big, pronounced low end can be really attractive when you're playing on your own. But like I said, it's just going to clash with the bass guitar and the bass drum. So we do not need it in our recorded or our live guitar tone. Speaking about a live guitar tone, when you're playing at really high volumes, the high end is really going to become abrasive. So I will bring this high cut down as low as 6,500 Hertz. This might sound a little bit dull if you're listening through a phone speaker or you're listening at low volumes. I've got my Adam A7X monitors cranked up quite high at the moment, and there is quite a pronounced difference when I do this though. And it has the nice effect of kind of smoothing everything out. So for live guitar tones, that's where I start with the low and the high cut. If I was recording, I would probably just leave the high cut alone and just use that 80 Hertz low cut. And then if I want to change it later on, I've got all the tools at my disposal in my workstation to do all those kind of things. It's not really a concern right here, but for live stuff, that's where I start. That's my first tip. The second tip would be to blend two cabinets. So I talked earlier how we've got this SM57 capture of this 4x12 Recto cab. There are a whole selection of different microphone captures of the various cabs available to us, one of which is this same 4x12 Recto cab. But you can see here, it says 121. So that's indicating a Royer 121 or 121, however you want to pronounce it. A ribbon microphone. Let's have a listen to what that one sounds like on its own. Totally different vibe going on there, but the real trick is to blend these two. Let's hear them at the same time. Furthermore, you can adjust that balance to taste. I know I like to dip the ribbon just a little bit lower than the Dynamic 57. And that's kind of a best of both worlds approach there. There are thousands of different impulses in the FM3 and Axe FX3, and you can mix and match them and blend them to taste. It's a really great way to bring out a unique character in your guitar tone, because after all, the beauty of these devices is about finding your own guitar sound in there, and blending two mics like this is a really great way to do that. So we've talked about blending two cabs, we've talked about the cuts in the preamp block. One really cool thing is in the preamp block, this is essentially like a mini kind of recording strip here. We can select a recording preamp. I really like this transformer type. Let's put it in high quality mode as well. And you can add some drive and some saturation in there. This kind of gives it a really nice kind of polished, almost sort of like vintage 70s guitar tone. Let's turn up the saturation and the drive a little bit. Actually, let's leave them down and then we'll turn them up as I play. Pretty cool there. You can hear it really kind of warms everything up and smooths it out. It's a great tip to use when you're recording. Furthermore, there is a 3-band console style EQ in here. For example, if I wanted to bump the mid-range a little bit and just kind of give it a little bit of a lift. That's a really, really cool one. Let's move on to the room parameters in here, because if you just want to give yourself a nice kind of amp in the room experience or a bit more of that kind of vibe, you can use the room level in here. Essentially, this just uses the early reflections algorithm from the Reverb block. So if you want, you can turn this up, and I find anything above kind of 40% starts to sound a little bit kind of too phasey for my liking, but let's have a listen to it around 35%. Nice little effect right there. I normally use a reverb block in my patches to get the same sort of effect because it gives me a little bit more control. But if you've got a really stacked preset and you don't have the spare CPU to run a reverb block, just to give yourself a little bit of that kind of roomy edge, you can adjust this room level and change the room shape. I just normally leave it at the stock settings and bump that up a little bit, which I really like. And the final little tip here is kind of like an advanced recording tip. Let's go to the align parameters in the cabinet block. So by default, we can load up any two factory impulses and they will be in phase. But a really cool thing you can do with two real-world microphones is just play around with the phase a little bit, and we can do that with this distance parameter. So you can basically change the alignment of these two microphones on this cabinet here. Let's say I just kind of move this 121 along a little bit. Let's have a listen to that. So it's really out of phase there if you go too hard with the distance, but you know, just kind of like a couple of mil will give you a nice effect. So you can hear there that when they're perfectly in phase, the high end, I call it like a kind of glitter or sparkle in there. Some people might call it fizz, but it seemed like that kind of 6mm position just smoothed all of that out. It didn't really affect the body and the character of the guitar tone. Kind of reminds me of that old, when you listen to old 70s Black Sabbath records, it would have a bit of that thing going on. Really fun there. That's probably one of the most underrated little things you can do in the cabinet block there, is play around with the phase. So they're my tips and tricks for the cabinet block to basically get more out of it. And like I said earlier, to really customize it and fine tune it to your taste and bring out a unique character in your guitar tone. I don't think the tone we started with just the single cabinet IR and no low or high cuts, sounded bad or unusable. But I think now that we've gone through and applied, say, the phase, we've added a bit of this kind of room level. We've used the preamp low cut, the preamp modeling in here, again, really underrated, as well as the tone controls and the trick where you blend two different cabinet IRs. You just have so many options here and so many ways to dial in your tone from the cabinet block. It is easily as powerful as the amp block. If you don't get the cab block right, no matter what you do to the amp block, it's just not ever going to sound satisfactory, and vice versa. I really hope you all enjoyed this Tuesday tone tip. Tune in next week for more tips and tricks with the Axe FX3 and FM3. Till next time, stay excellent, be good to one another. I'll see you all then.